Imagine being a teenage girl in a quiet medieval village, and one day, someone whispers your name, witch. No trial, no mercy, just fear and fire. In the Middle Ages, thousands of girls and women were accused of practicing witchcraft, often with no proof at all. Their punishment? Unthinkable. Let's uncover the chilling truth behind 10 horrifying ways they were killed. 1. Burning at the stake. In towns across Europe, burning wasn't just punishment, it was spectacle. When a girl was accused of witchcraft, people believed fire could cleanse her soul. Crowds would gather. Soldiers tied her to a wooden stake, stacked dry wood beneath her feet, and lit the fire. The screams could last for minutes, sometimes longer. These executions weren't fast or merciful. Women were burned alive, often without real proof. Just an accusation was enough. Maybe a neighbor got sick. Maybe livestock died. Maybe she spoke too confidently or too softly. That was all it took. Even worse, the church sometimes allowed execution before a trial. Burning wasn't just a way to kill, it was a message, a warning. And for many innocent girls, it was their last moment on earth. Her only crime? Being different, being feared, or simply being born a girl in the wrong place at the wrong time. 2. Drowning. Swimming a witch. In the Middle Ages, one of the most disturbing tests for witchcraft was called swimming. It wasn't about finding the truth, it was about watching someone suffer. A girl accused of being a witch would have her hands and feet bound, then be thrown into a river or lake. The logic? If she floated, she was guilty. The pure water rejected her. If she sank, she was innocent, but she might drown before anyone could pull her out. Either way, death was likely. This wasn't a rare method. Communities across Europe used it, believing it was fair, but there was nothing fair about it. Girls, some as young as 12, were subjected to this test based on little more than gossip or fear. Floating meant execution. Sinking meant a watery grave. All of it driven by superstition, not evidence. It didn't expose witches. It exposed the cruelty of a world terrified by what it didn't understand. 3. Hanging. Hanging was one of the most common methods used to execute accused witches, especially in England and parts of Northern Europe. Unlike the fiery spectacle of burning, hanging was seen as a more civil form of punishment. But for the girls accused, there was nothing merciful about it. Once condemned, the girl would be marched to the gallows, sometimes through jeering crowds. A noose was slipped around her neck, and with little ceremony, the executioner released the trapdoor or simply pulled the rope. Death didn't always come quickly. Some suffocated slowly, kicking and struggling for breath. In many cases, these girls had done nothing wrong. They were poor, outspoken, midwives, or simply unlucky. Yet hanging was treated as justice. Afterward, their bodies were left on display as a warning. The message was clear: step out of line, and you could be next. No spells, no magic, just fear and a rope. 4. Torture to death. Before many girls were executed for witchcraft, they were tortured, often for days. The goal wasn't justice, it was confession. Authorities believed that pain could force the truth out, so they used horrific tools: thumb screws to crush fingers, the rack to stretch limbs until joints popped, or iron boots that shattered bones. Some victims were whipped, burned with hot irons, or suspended by their arms behind their backs until shoulders dislocated. Girls as young as 13 were subjected to this. If they confessed under torture, it was taken as proof. If they didn't, the torture continued, or they died on the table. Many never made it to trial. Their broken bodies gave out first. This wasn't about rooting out evil, it was about control, fear, and punishing those who didn't fit the mold. These girls weren't witches, They were victims of a brutal system that saw pain as a path to truth. 5. Stoning. Stoning was one of the oldest and most brutal forms of execution, and in some medieval communities, it became a way to punish girls accused of witchcraft without any formal trial. It often began with whispers, then accusations, then violence. A crowd would form, rocks were gathered, and the condemned girl, sometimes no older than 14, was forced to kneel or stand as villagers hurled stones at her. The first few hits didn't kill, they broke bones, split skin, knocked her unconscious. But the crowd kept going. Some believed they were doing God's work. Others were just following the mob. No judge, no jury. Just pure, chaotic fear wrapped in religious righteousness. These killings weren't always officially sanctioned, but that made them even more terrifying because they could happen anywhere, at any time. One rumor, one accusation, and a young girl's life could end under a storm of stones, hurled by the very neighbors she once trusted. 6. Crushing. Crushing was a slow, excruciating way to die, and while not as common as hanging or burning, it was used in cases where a confession was needed. The victim, often a girl accused of witchcraft, was laid flat on the ground. A wooden board was placed on her body, and then stones or heavy weights were added one by one. The pressure increased slowly, crushing bones, collapsing lungs, and forcing the air out of her body. Some endured this torture for hours, even days. The goal? To force them to confess to consorting with the devil. Many refused, their silence taken as guilt. Others broke under the pain, saying anything to make it stop. While most famously used later in places like Salem, versions of this were used in medieval Europe too. Crushing wasn't just physical punishment, it was a brutal demonstration of power, used to silence anyone who dared to resist or remain defiant. 7. Beheading. Beheading was often considered a noble death, reserved for those of higher social standing, even among accused witches. In some parts of medieval Europe, if a girl came from a respected or wealthy family, her punishment for witchcraft might be the swift strike of a sword or axe rather than burning or hanging. But make no mistake, this was still a public execution, and just as final. The condemned girl would be brought before a crowd, often blindfolded and made to kneel. The executioner would raise the blade high, sometimes missing the first time, making the ordeal even more horrific. Beheading may have been faster than other methods, but it wasn't merciful. Many girls died without proof of any crime, only fear, superstition, or politics. And for noble families, it was often less about justice and more about preserving their reputation, while still silencing those accused of wielding unnatural power. 8. Starvation or neglect in prison. Not every accused girl died at the hands of an executioner. Some wasted away slowly in the dark corners of medieval prisons, forgotten, starved, and left to die. Once accused of witchcraft, a girl could be thrown into a dungeon with no trial date, no medical care, and barely any food or water. Many were packed into filthy cells with rats, open sewage, and other prisoners already dying from disease. These were not short stays. Trials could take months or never happen at all. In that time, girls grew weak, sick, and broken. Some went mad, others simply stopped eating. Guards ignored their cries, and priests came only to demand confessions. To die this way wasn't dramatic or public. It was silent, invisible, and often forgotten. But for many young girls, this was their fate. Not because they were witches, but because the world believed punishing suspicion was more important than protecting innocence. 9. Mob violence. Not all witch killings were ordered by kings, judges, or priests. Some came from the very people. The accused lived among neighbors, villagers, even friends. In times of fear, famine, plague, or bad harvests, someone had to be blamed. And often, that someone was a girl who stood out. Too poor, too smart, too quiet, too different. Mob violence didn't wait for a trial. Once a whisper spread, "She's a witch," a crowd could form fast. People stormed homes, dragged girls into the streets, beat them, tortured them, even burned or drowned them on the spot. No laws, no defense, just chaos. These deaths were raw, emotional, and terrifying, and they were everywhere across villages, towns, and regions gripped by superstition. Girls died not because they cast spells, but because someone needed a scapegoat. And in a frightened crowd, truth didn't matter. Only fear did, and it killed as swiftly as any blade. 10. Execution by church or inquisition. By the late Middle Ages, the church, especially through the Inquisition, played a growing role in witch trials. Girls accused of witchcraft were interrogated by priests, often tortured until they confessed. Witchcraft was seen as heresy, a crime against God, making execution not just legal, but holy. Many were burned at the stake in public, their deaths framed as spiritual purification. Even children weren't safe. A whispered rumor could lead to torture and fire. The church claimed to protect souls, but often destroyed lives instead. In the name of faith, countless innocent girls were condemned without proof, mercy, or hope. These girls weren't witches. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and victims of fear and ignorance. Their stories remind us what happens when superstition replaces truth and justice turns into cruelty. Thanks for watching. If this moved you, share it. Because history should never be repeated.